I think, good fortune to sit on the One Nova Scotia Commission or the Ivany Commission. And some people still say to me, how could you have done that? You're a total sellout. And other people are like, thank God you were on there. So I still don't know, which I still don't know. But I did just learn from Mark that I'm no longer an activist, but I'm an advocate. And I may have to change that later on. Because I still think of myself as first and foremost, I fight for the environment, and I have a PhD in marine biology, so I don't have a lot to do with the film world. And I took my position on the Ivany Commission quite really seriously, and I learned an incredible amount. I did my PhD in sponges and marine sponges, and so I like to think that the one thing that prepared me for it was that I could absorb a lot of information. So when it comes to I guess what happened to me during the Ivany Commission is I felt responsible for the economy. I remember like the day Michelin announced it was going to close in Pictou, and I was like, oh shit, it is my fault. And I was like, oh no, I can't be responsible for all this stuff. It's too much. But I took really to heart and emotionally, because we had gone around the province and talked to 25 communities officially, but probably 50 unofficially, and I really do absorb how people are feeling and the struggles that are going on, particularly in rural Nova Scotia. So I think, but I also took my position quite seriously in that I do work at the Ecology Action Centre. I wasn't there as an Ecology Action Centre appointee. EAC did not have a seat on the commission, it was me. And I was very clear when I started it that this is not an EAC position. But that I was there to make sure that something about the environment got into the report. And if it didn't, then I would not be on the commission anymore. So film doesn't really relate to the environment per se. And I think I realized when my sort of film story started, it started in two spots. The two places where I realized why I needed to speak out. In March, I was flying across the country, and I finally had a chance to watch a movie. I have 2 kids. I don't ever go out to movies anymore. And I got to fly across to Vancouver, and I watched a lot of movies. It was great. But one of them was Heartbeat, and I hadn't had a chance to see it in the film, when it was in theaters here. But I was really glad it was there. I always click on Canadian films, and there was Heartbeat. And I was so proud. I was like, wow, like Nova Scotia, a little beautiful, low-budget film made in Halifax is like being seen on Air Canada across the country, even better than the Newfoundland ads. But it made me really proud. I was like, wow, this is kind of the thing that we do because we can punch above our weight in this province. So I was feeling good about that. That was in March. And then the other thing I did one night, I took myself out on a date with my friend Aaron, and I went to see Lawrence Hill talk, and I heard him talking about the Book of Negroes. I haven't seen the Book of Negroes yet, but I heard him talk about the Book of Negroes, and one of the things that in a lot of our consultations with the Commission, our systemic racism came up. I don't see, is anybody of First Nations, any First Nations people in this room? No one? Is there anybody who is not white? Almost not white? Maybe one? So this is a problem we have in our province. And when I was listening to Lawrence Hill talk about the Book of Negroes, and the fact that it was filmed here, it was really meaningful, actually. I was like, wow, we are able to start to tell these stories. And telling these stories in this province right now is really important. So none of these things, they just happened. I just saw them. They were part of my cultural life. And then I think I got a call from Scott Simpson, or I saw him on the playground, and he said, "There's this thing, this film tax credit. They may cut it. We don't know." And immediately, my kind of oh shit, I'm responsible came from my Ivany role, where I was like, oh shit, because when I think, number one, I live in the north end of Halifax. So many of the people that I know and like are tied somehow to some sort of creative industry. The other thing was, I know that a lot of the film is one of these industries that's kind of spread across the province, right? You need to shoot in Lewisburg, you shoot in Chester, you pick your spot. People get really excited when a film is coming to town, right? And when we were doing our consultations, a film was in Chester, or Haven was being shot. That was a huge kind of economic thing in that town. It was good. People who are painters, electricians, carpenters, etc. were getting hired on things on the off season or in between when they were working in other people's houses. And to me, it said, number one, this is an industry that's like, it's spread across the province. It's also full of really resilient people because they never know when the next film might come, but they've stuck around and waited for it, right? And again, so many people leave here because you can't find jobs, we're not willing to stick around, there's things that are better somewhere else. But over the past 20 years, we've built this industry, albeit with tax credits. But no one ever complained. So not one time did I ever hear, and we heard, I can't tell you how many complaints about how the province is run, about who did what the NDP did wrong, what the Tories did wrong, what the Liberals are going to do wrong. Everybody does things wrong, lots of complaints, right? Money given to so-and-so shouldn't be given to so-and-so, blah, blah, blah. I never heard anybody complain about the film's tax credit. Not once in 18 months or all 14 months of consultation. None. Nobody ever complained. So when Scott said this might happen, I was like, well, that's not really a good idea. The other thing that I thought about was that the process. So, our big call to action, Nova Scotians, let's do this together. It's really important because we tend to not do things together. We tend to think, I can't work with them because they have something that I don't, or that town, they're too far away and we don't like them. And we have this weird competitive thing that I think we're starting to get over. But it needs collaboration, like more than anything, what we called for in our report, and what I feel really strongly about is good process and collaboration, right? Like, let's seriously sit down and do stuff together. And one thing I think on the commission that I learned is that I didn't have a lot in common with other commissioners, but we managed to come up with agreement on a report. And I learned an incredible amount from their perspectives. And it was a motley crew, arguably. But everybody had very different perspectives, and we sat in rooms day after day, we drank wine, we talked about things we didn't agree about, but we came up with a conclusion. Some of them I still don't totally agree with, but I agree with enough that I was happy to go forward. So the whole process, I was like, well, what about, did they consult with the film industry? Have you been talking to them? I also worked a lot in lobbying and advocating federal government, international government on fisheries policy. So I know a lot about, like, you got to get in there 3 years in advance if you want a policy put forward. You got to make friends, you got to find allies, you got to have coffees, you got to have beers, you got to do whatever it takes. Like, even in the city of Bloomfield, I've worked on Bloomfield for 15 years. I'm still having coffees and beers, like trying to move a project forward. But it seemed to me the process was fundamentally broken, and it went against what we, as a commission, said in Ivany, that we need to do things differently. This wasn't doing things differently. This was looking at numbers and not taking into consideration the total impact. And the other thing that from the people I know in this city and in this province who inspired me, who are like sticking it out and having families just because, I was like, shit, if they go, we're really screwed. Like, I don't know who I'm going to talk to. But those are also in the whole call for, like, we need creative ways of thinking about our natural resource industries. We need new ways of storytelling. We're not going to do that without our storytellers. We're not going to rethink our farming or our fishing or our forestry if we have the same thinkers. And so to me, the thinking part, the creative part, the working around problems, I'm going to go make something creative because that's what I feel like today, is a really important part of what we need going forward. So I decided that this was something that I felt strongly enough about that I was going to, as I said, spend my Ivany capital. I don't know if I have any Ivany capital. I haven't looked. There's no bank account. There's no poker chips. I don't know if I have any more. But I haven't spoken out really strongly on environmental things around Ivany because, like, that's happening. Other people are doing that. I did that. I also, interestingly, and I'm going to say this even though I don't think I'll regret it, but I've been told by my employer, who's the Ecology Action Centre, I should be careful what I speak out against because this government doesn't like the Ecology Action Centre, so maybe I shouldn't speak out on things that aren't about the environment. Whew, for me that was a big one.
Wow.
And it got back to the issue of silence and being silent about things that maybe don't immediately affect you. So people were, after I did a video and wrote a letter to the Premier, and people were like, thank you for speaking out. Thank you for speaking out. Because I'm not involved. I don't work in the film industry. And it struck me as like, we need to be much better at working with allies in unexpected places and unfamiliar places. So working with allies, finding people who care because they care, not because they're making money, not because it affects them personally, but because it's a good thing. And to me, that's the essence of community, and it is the one thing we actually really have, and I think that's one lesson that I learned from the whole film thing, was like, there's this huge, amazing community that maybe the industry's not perfect, but people certainly care, right? It touches everybody. I gave a talk at the Sheet Harbor Chamber of Commerce 2 weeks ago, and the film tax credit was a big issue, right? They're like, people are leaving. My kid has to go. I know 4 people in Sheet Harbor who can't work, right? So it was a big issue there. But this idea of like allies in places that we didn't know people were there, and also speaking out for things that you care about, but it might not be your issue, I think is super important. And then finally, the issue of being silent. And I work in an environmental organization. I can say environmental organizations have pretty much been silenced on the federal level for the most part because we've been called terrorists. So it's a little tricky to speak out when you're called a terrorist, and you get your charitable status taken away, and then you can't raise money. That didn't happen to AC. We did pretty well. But recently, I've been getting calls from the federal government saying, "Hey, we really need to work together again. Just let's talk." And so I feel like we've not talked, and I couldn't be silent on this issue in particular because I felt responsible, and it was one that I wasn't personally engaged in, and I felt that it was a safe one, right? And I that's why it's so strange that EAC has said you shouldn't maybe speak out. I'm like, but that's a safe thing. EAC doesn't work in film. And the final thing is that it's stories. These are our stories. We tell our stories now by films and videos and documentaries, and our stories are so important, and they are part of not being silent. And I think that for me, it was just, this is too important to who we are and our culture, and to not being silent. And so I decided I'm not going to be silent, and I wasn't. And I've learned a whole bunch about the film industry and numbers, and I was crunching numbers and trying to figure out like how much per capita is the Nova Scotia film industry worth across the country, and my number crunching from the internet was like, we're third. Like our film industry per capita, we're one of the top 3 in the country. And those are the kinds of things we have to start talking about, right? And being more celebratory of. And eventually I also still want to go back to film festivals, so after my children grow up. So that's another reason. But I will pass it along now. Let's see if we can